Hey, welcome to the next episode of the Summit Series. Today we sat down with Jamie Simonsen, the Chief Technology Officer of a company called Space Talk, an incredible company building smartwatches and other technologies for kids to improve their safety and also moving into aged care too. This was an awesome chat with Dan, myself, and Jamie. This introduction is a bit shorter than normal. I will put Jamie's bio in the notes and show description. Yeah, please enjoy the conversation with myself, Dan, and Jamie.
It's obviously the same. Been an engineer for a long time. Started off obviously as a engineer slash technician for one of the first sort of computerized point of sale companies back in the late '90s. So sort of starting in there and sort of figuring out getting that I suppose exposure to how people actually interact and use the product, and then also at the same time getting introduced to how they engineer for it. But a lot of my time has been spent, what you call in sort of the mum and pop and sort of startup businesses, creating technology and IP for them throughout the sort of journey. And I sort of consider myself fortunate that I've been able to work with some really talented engineers across multiple fields, not just being what you would consider, your sort of core software development, but also, into hardware and RF design and, how things actually communicate and work with each other, at a physics level rather than just obviously the digital one. So, and then, more recently now moved across into Space Talk as VP of Engineering there, which again is what you would consider what you call a traditional full stack, where we're doing, hardware, firmware, and then software and cloud solutions as well. So yeah, it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, I'm very excited to dive into this stuff, but what would you say is some of your earliest experiences that shaped you to be the person that you are or the leader that you are today?
Look, it probably would have been when I was working at Jets, which was the till system. So it was developed back in New Zealand. And then what we sort of did is tried to make a shift across into creating what we called the first sort of computerized cash register. And then that's where we created a new spin-off called XCR, which was Extreme Cash Registers. And from there, that was when the owner at the time just sort of brought me along on the road trip, right? So we were going across up into Europe and UK, across into North America, and you're sitting in no longer sitting behind the desk coding. You're now in the boardroom and actually doing technical sales and trying to sell stuff. And then the sort of nature in which he presented things and said was that we're an agile team and we could always produce things. So you go, oh, you want that feature? It'll be in the system by tomorrow. And we get back to the hotel room and we're like, okay, let's code it all up overnight and get the guys back in New Zealand to give us a hand and then present it next day. Which obviously is, when you think about it now from risk management, project management side of things, right? It's just, you lean with your chin all the way through that, right? So it's but it was sort of that get stuff done mentality, right? Like just build it and show and that side, and that's where I learned probably how to be agile, but at the same time, right, you do get burnt and you sort of learn from those mistakes and go, okay, maybe we should approach that a different way. Maybe we should be more measured in that approach, instead of burning yourself out trying to meet deadlines just to, meet a sales expectation, to actually maybe pare it back. And I think there's mutual respect that gets, given for that as well. If you're actually upfront and say, hey, that's going to take, a little bit more than, what you're expecting. And these are the reasons why.
Yeah, wow, sounds like a pretty formative experience in your career.
Yeah, it was.
How do you think back now a bit on say like what you're saying about the risk area thing? Like, do you look at it differently now looking back?
Yeah. Look, I do, because I think with that as well, right, it comes into scope and requirements, and you don't actually fully go through that entire product development journey, right? And then you're always iterating back, right? And you're coming back and you're either making changes, refactoring, or completely having to blow it up, start again, right? Because you missed the the core requirement at the very last stage. You never thought that far ahead because you're in there trying to, deliver something for a demo, but not actually building it out. And I think that's one of the things I've sort of, come to have more of an appreciation of over the years, is more of that, it's almost a symbiotic relationship between engineering and product from that side, right? And there is, there's always a bit of to and fro, and there is always a bit of friction there. But I think that's that's not only just natural. I think that's actually good, because it's only for the betterment of the product at the end of the day. And I think that if you're in there with the same hat, trying to do product development and engineering, and doing all that as the one person, I think that's actually a conflict of interest for the product.
Yeah, okay. How do you, what's your philosophy on what are the important ingredients of a good working relationship between engineering and product?
Look, I think it's more around boundaries, right? And knowing when, say, product is starting to, specify more engineering specs and requirements, rather than keeping to, say, the brief of the user story. And then the same thing again with engineering is making design decisions during the development phase where they should actually pause and maybe pass that back to, say, product for input, right? And then that sort of stops those those shock moments that come through when you're actually going to demonstrate the feature that you've implemented for them. And there's been design decisions made halfway through that they weren't aware of.
How do you think product can effectively get like what they need from engineering? Let's say, like, while they're thinking about a great feature or idea, or they're talking to customers or that kind of thing. How do you think they can best leverage what engineering can bring, whether that's a realistic view of what's possible, or, challenges, or like dragons, where, hey, if we go in this direction, this is going to be problematic. What do you think? How can engineering help product in that?
Look, I think there's always that open communication. I think that's one of my core sort of mottos on everything, right? Is open communication, right? Like, I don't want my engineers to be in the back room and under lock and key, and I'm gatekeeping communication in. I always like to have open communication. So with that part, as part of that sort of user story development, I always like to involve the engineering early on in that process. So, because I've actually come across, and even in my current role, there's been like little nuggets of gold that the engineering team have thought about as well. And so going, oh, well, if we're doing this, we can actually help the user journey along because we've got this information over here, or we've got this process here as well. So I think that there's obviously that, the requirement stage, but then also that can sort of morph and become, more a collaborative effort between engineering and product. When you actually go to actually finalize the design and say, right, okay, what are we building and how?
How do you view the balance of, by, I guess a natural state for an engineer is like being focused, like being able to code and think deeply about a problem, and have, say, extended blocks of time where you're in that space, because if you're moving in and out of that space, you lose a lot from context switching and losing focus and deep work and stuff like that. So how do you balance that? Like, when do you bring engineers into those kind of more open-ended conversations where, I guess, it's very different brain activity from deep focused work when they're coding? How do you balance those worlds?
Yeah, look, and I think a lot of that comes into some of my sort of call it engineering philosophies around that. Is that it comes down to scheduling and planning, right? So you set up a schedule and you have that design phase where you're working with product to sort of set up the next few sprints, and then I sort of don't go full agile scrum. I do a little bit of maybe let's call it more of a hybrid, right? Sort of more waterfall within sort of a sprint mentality. So we go through the design phase, get everything up front, sort of task it all out. So they do the user stories, and then we go through and actually do all the tasking, lay that out, say, in a 2-week unit of work, being a sprint. We lay all that out, and then that's engineering time. So then they get that 2 weeks of dedicated engineering time. Of course, obviously, depending on the nature of the business. So as an example, Space Talk, it's not your traditional sort of startup, right? So we've got a legacy platform So, there's always going to be those code reds that come up, but, we try and manage those as we do. But yeah, I guess that to answer your question, allowing scheduling, planning, and then using more of a sprint mentality to go through and execute that. And then what we do is then allow a week after that as going a bit of it. So when I inside the business, when I say done, that's engineering done. So we then push that to our UAT environments, and then we allow product and the rest of the business to sort of delve in, have a bit of a play about with it, give us feedback, changes. So there's always that week afterwards, just to sort of finesse and tidy things up before then we go obviously to release that feature out. And that feature then may sit impending in UAT, and we may push that out and another couple of iterations after that.
I guess like what you're describing sounds like a very different world to where you started, where you're kind of just chucking stuff out there in a hotel room at night.
Yeah.
What do you think, like having a lot of the process and having the gates and things like that to go through, do you think there's something lost about just being able to hack something together in a hotel room? Like how do we get like high amounts of innovation in a world where we kind of need to balance with process and checking boxes occasionally and stuff like that? What do you think?
Yeah, look, and I think that's always the struggle, right? Is that where do you how do you balance and having that? And I don't think there's a perfect answer for that. I've sort of had thoughts about that, even where I am at the moment, and we're sort of thinking about having almost like innovation days where guys can just sort of go and work off on a project, right? You used to have it with other companies, right, where they used to dedicate you maybe half a day a week that you could just go work on a personal pet project. So it's not so much of a side project, but sort of giving them space to go and even learn something, right? Like, I mean, with the pace that frameworks and utilities and everything else are all coming out now, it's almost a full-time job just keeping up to date with what's the best framework to use for this problem or this platform and all that side of things. What I'm one thing I'm exploring at the moment is there a way that we can sort of run that in parallel? And the same thing as I said, right, is then scheduling and planning, having that 2-week sprint, but then also say, hey, here's 2 weeks of allocated time for just a greenfield project. Like go and chuck something together, because a lot of things now, right, and it comes down to solution architecture and how you develop and build these things, right? But you can now just have a bolt-on microservice. So if you wanted to go and do a data analytics project, just go and set that up over there, hook into the feeds, get the messages through, and then start to do your processing and maybe have a POC that comes out the end of it. But I think with that, it's still the same thing where you got to be sort of at least upfront and clear on the expectation, because then you almost end up being that Department of Defense mentality where you'll just keep building without actually building something. So it's more around as long as the intent's there, I guess, and that's how it can work. But I guess there's no perfect solution to that, and especially as I said, if you're sort of in the startup and you haven't got anything out at the moment, your investors are happy as such, and you're meeting those deadlines. I think there is that ability for true innovation. But unfortunately, if you've already got an established business with legacy customers and legacy products, it becomes almost a three-way tie on a priority as to how much do you spend on innovation, how much do you spend on just building feature sets on the current product, and then how much do you actually spend maintaining and making sure, right? Like there's always that. You always get that notification, something is end of life, a certificate is expiring, a framework is no longer, there's a new LTS version. It's just that, it's that balance, but you're never going to get right. But I think as long as you communicate that through to your team and that's the other thing as well, it goes back to, again, communication and allowing your team to, even put their hand up, right? Like that's the thing is us as being up at that executive level, our heads are in the cloud a little bit. We don't see a lot of the stuff that's going on, and some of the grassroots of engineering, and seeing, okay, hey, this framework's come out or this has come out. I wouldn't mind having time to explore that. And you can go, okay, almost put it in the backlog, right, as a task, and then you can just assign it to them and say, right, I'm going to give you a couple of days just to go and investigate that, write it up, let me know, and then we can explore that as an option.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, right? With your, I mean, if you ship anything, any code or any system, I guess I like to think that as soon as you ship it, you've now got legacy and maintenance requirements and obligations, technical debt, I guess. How do you communicate those kind of priorities to the rest of the business? Because it's sometimes a tricky situation, if you're dealing with something that is not immediate. I guess it's not like an immediate important thing that the customer's not going to ask you to make sure you're on the latest version. Well, it depends on what space you're in, but most customers probably aren't. How do you communicate and help with prioritization and get everyone on the same page? What does that look like?
Yeah, look, and again, it's being upfront and establishing technical debt. And then the same thing again, right, as things come up. Like perfect example is obviously Twilio have end of life their programmable video platform, which is what we use for our watches and phones to be able to do video calling. So there's now a project, right, and I think it's been able to establish that. Again, same thing as I just said about the innovation, right, is putting that actually in the backlog as an item. And then communicating that up, right? Because obviously, the one thing, again, you picked on it, Dan, right? Is my lessons learned from the Jamie of old as well is coming into risk management, right, and risk assessment. And that's where I've spent a lot of my time over the last few years as well, is with cybersecurity. So when we go to open up a project or delve back into it, one of the first things as well is to just do a dependency check. Right, just look over some of the dependencies. Are there any vulnerabilities? Do we need to patch anyone? I mean, there's only so many signals you can pull in to say, okay, does this dependency have a vulnerability in it? But it gives you the opportunity to at least get into that mindset. And I think that's a lot of that as well, which I'm trying to impart on to the engineering team in general, is around not doing security by design, but looking into it from that standpoint as well, right? Because at the end of the day, depending on your business, whether you're dealing with people's financial records or children's information as well, we've become custodians of their data. It's up to us in order to make sure that they're secure and safe. And you only got to look at the examples over the past few years. We can all sit here and say, we've got the locked up, trust tree nest of data in our establishments. But I think it's honestly now, it's a matter of when, not,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say that if you're doing a good job and you become big enough, you're going to get hacked at some point, right? So it's just, do you prioritize it? Are you doing things to prevent it? Have you done everything on your side and you haven't just sat there and then when it's happened, then you've acted, right?
Well, that's it. And that's where a lot of these things are coming in, right? There are reactionary. There's not much proactive. But I think there's going to have to be, you're starting to see it now, right? Like it is becoming that zero trust relationship now. So, people are only wanting to deal with companies that do have a cybersecurity framework or, accredited either by ISO 27001 or they're, doing the ASD Essential 8, which is obviously where a lot of the Australian government departments are aligning with as well. So, and again, that goes back to process, right? It helps you establish at least, SDLCs and all of these sorts of things, right? I was never exposed to back when I first started my career, right? Like we didn't have, branching strategies or anything like that. How do we handle, UAT test development environments? And then how do we, make sure that there's segregation and gatekeeping in between all of that? So it's, and that's where you can then have, really automated, CI/CD pipelines, everything all sort of, just works. Right, and you set that to align with your policies and processes, and then it keeps the engineers as well don't have to worry too much about it. Right, they need to be aware of it, but as long as you've got everything all set up, I mean, there's enough tools out there now, and depending on which house you're aligned with, right, they're all there, from the Amazons to the Microsofts to even Google as well, and GitHub.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, security. Like it's a bit of a. I find it, I guess in my space, it's a bit grey because we don't have customers asking us for compliance requirements or anything like that. So I kind of treat it as for a bit of fun, but also kind of half serious. Is coming up with how do I explain to someone else like how I view security and balance things, risks, things like that. I come up with like a sleep index. It's like if I can't sleep at night, then there's a problem I have to go fix or pay attention to. I guess like because compliance is also not a silver bullet either, right? Like you still have, even though you have process and you have checks and balances or some things there that give you a good posture to start with, but it's not the end of the story, right? How is there a way that you look at security in terms of appetite for risk, I guess? Like how do you decide where to put or prioritize work in that space? How do you assess risk and how do you kind of go, oh, this is too much risk for us, we should really action this?
Yeah, look, and I guess it's having that baseline, I think as well, right, is especially for me, right, coming into an already established company, it's got nearly 20 years of software and data stored around as well, right? It's about doing that risk assessment and looking at things. And again, as you said, Dan, I think that's a great analogy, right? It's that sleep index, like, it's in the beginning, right, you don't know what you don't know. And then sort of going through and going, okay, and again, it's, whether you know to do it yourself or you bring in a consultant to quickly, just have a quick look over things. But I think, from there, it's mainly about then, establishing, a risk management system, right? Like how do you identify risk and then how do you prioritize based off that? And then that comes into just change management, right? Like when do you go to do that? What's the risk involved with that? Because at the end of the day, right, it's the same thing with the engineering team. You could make the most locked down, secure development environment in history, but no one would be able to work, right? You'd slow your development down so much that no one would have admin access. No one could actually open their code editors or be able to even build or push. And I think it does come into that balance on when you go, okay, we're gonna accept that risk, because at the end of the day, right, like the biggest vulnerabilities in any business is the people, right? It's usually the people, right? It's always that one person who clicks on an email or doesn't forget to close the port or just provisions and Amazon S3 bucket with default permissions, right, and then stores PII in there. And that's where it comes into, right, okay, well, maybe that becomes an out of band process, right, where we then do cyber awareness training and teaching them about and also bring them into it as well, right? Like they are our greatest line of defense, right? So we need to invest in them and make sure that everyone in the business is aware of their responsibility as well. But yeah, look, I think it just comes down to, right, what's the risk of exposure from both financial and reputation. Those are probably my two things I look at first, and then make sure that they're those areas are secure enough. And then you just work your way down the chain and just, as you said, do your normal risk analysis on that as you move down.
I want to dive into this a little bit later, but if we can just go back, if you don't mind, because I'm fascinated by your stuff at Jets and then in the hotel room and working with someone that obviously gave you a bit carte blanche. It's not the typical engineer route. How do you get from there to where you are now? Like, tell us a bit about the next moves that you've done, and was it strategic? Did it just happen? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I guess, after my time at sort of Jets and then XCR, we went through the full, what you would call product development life cycle, right? So we sort of went for a POC, came into a bit of a product. We developed it and pushed it around. We were never going to go and sort of go out to market ourselves, right? It was something that we were going to, try and get, acquired by, right? Like the bigger companies and bigger players out there. And it didn't work, right? Like I suppose everyone's all wanting to talk about the successes, but there's lots of times when you pour a good 10 years of your life and travel around the world thinking this is gonna make me, and you lose that time with your family and everything else, and it doesn't work. And I guess from there I sort of thought, well, instead of being tied to someone, I thought, well, why don't I just bet on myself? So I think in 2011, I went out and sort of just started my own sort of consultancy business. So just doing, engineering, just getting back into doing that pure engineering side of things. And then from there, because you always think, grass is always greener, work with more established companies, learn a bit from them, sort of go in there and help. And then, I started to realize, hang on, a lot of these people are making the same mistakes that I was. And then so you sort of, start becoming that process and developing that. And then from there, because I was starting to come in from that side, I was starting to get more exposure to, say, the executive and the management side. So whereas with, Jets and that, I had a small team, and I was, young at the time as well, right? So there was a lot of life experience I didn't have then as well, right? Because it's not just about pure engineering. It's about having those life experiences and being able to, look at situations and handle them probably a little bit differently than what you would do if you're in your 20s, right? And just running at a problem. So I think that's, and then, as I said, I sort of progressed through there. And then, got offered a role, obviously, here in Australia. So I decided to, make the big shift and, pack everything all up into a container and move the entire family over in 2015. So I came over here and took up a role as, CTO at a company called BTG, which was Bluefly Wireless. And then that's when you start to get more involved in the day-to-day of the business, right? And that's when you start to understand stakeholder management, both from an external standpoint, but also from an internal. So you're dealing with, sales, marketing, even logistics and supply. As I said, a lot of the businesses I've been involved with, have been hardware-based businesses as well. So there's, you're managing, suppliers, supply chain, having to head over, overseas and source new products, and go through that side of things, right? And then you start to understand the dollars and cents, the P&L, what's cost, starting to then work on budgets. And, I guess there was nothing strategic. I've got that personality where if I don't understand something or know something, I seem to get nosy about it and just interject myself and sort of I don't need to become a master of it, but I like to understand it and then realize okay, what's my role with knowing that, so dealing with sales and marketing departments and and even with the finance side as well, and then starting to look at okay, even with R&D claims and doing the R&D grant schemes, how finance and engineering can actually work with each other to help the business as well. So, I guess there was no, strategy. I didn't come into it thinking, oh, I'm going to be, a CTO one day. And I guess it just sort of happened. And just from me being, wanting to know more outside the realms of engineering. But I guess at the end of the day as well, right, it then becomes a trade-off, right? Like it's the same thing. You're not on the tools every day. Am I still the engineer I used to be? Could I code as good as some of the guys below me? I'd say probably not. But I could probably bash something together in the hotel room if I had to do that again. But I guess that's where it came into it. And then, as I said, then after that, I moved across, and that's when I started to get more into, I guess where I am now, right, which is the sort of, the subject area being, RTLS, real-time location systems, location in general, and starting to work in some of those core technologies and systems. And that's when you start to, then, you've got to deal with multiple stakeholders with that. And then there's obviously, the hardware side and trying to stay up to date with that and staying on the forefront of that. And then doing that as well, my teams were solely based in Huntsville, Alabama and Austin, Texas. So that became a challenge in itself, because you've got two distinct teams that you're now managing, and in the Huntsville team, I had a really talented group, and some of these guys were, you could almost call them the grandfathers of ultra wideband, right? They were there back in the day, actually fighting the GPS boards and everything else to get FCC approval for actually being able to operate on the airwaves license free. So being able to learn from those guys and see the way that they, there was a whole division there that designed our own antennas. So we had our own, antenna design division. You start learning about, RF attenuation and null patterns and everything else as well. And, and then you're trying to manage all of that, and then decide, okay, what's this product going to do? What is it going to cost? What's the timeline? And I guess that's where I sort of found my niche, is I could speak to those guys on their level, understand what they're doing, but then, in a way, almost play defense for them as well, to sort of go, okay, let's do some stakeholder management here and manage up the chain to let people know, hey, we've had a problem here. We need to get in front of this. So it's going to be delayed a little bit longer. And I think that's, one of the, other things I've learned along the way as well, is that sometimes it's better to be upfront that there's a problem coming, even if you don't know it, right? Even if you don't know the sort of T-shirt size of what delays this is going to incur. But the sooner that you let everyone else know about it, the less of a surprise it becomes, and it becomes an easier situation to manage and deal with.
Does that mean that work you were doing had a lot of, I guess, like R&D experimentation type thing, where you didn't necessarily know how long something was going to take?
Yeah, exactly. So I guess one of the challenges we took on board was obviously during COVID, right? So everything all shut down, and that was the other thing. So I was over in the States, probably every 6 weeks, seeing the team. But during COVID, you just, you obviously couldn't get there. And we decided then, with our technology and our stack, we could actually do a far better job of doing, you remember back they had those contact tracing cards. They were using Bluetooth, right? And we all know Bluetooth and 2.4 gigahertz is, it's near enough, right? But it's a very fuzzy line. And when you're talking about specifics of, 1.5 meter bubbles and duration inside these bubbles. So we decided to give it a crack and create what's called a two-way ranging scheme and hardware that used both ultra wideband and Bluetooth. So we had like an outer band, because obviously, I think I've spoken to you about this, Kris, right? With hardware, you've got the trifecta, which is features, battery life, and then form factor, right? And there's always going to be a compromise across all of those three. So ultra wideband was very power hungry, so you couldn't use it all the time for doing a lot of your discovery. So you use then Bluetooth. So we had to develop all of that. So and that's we actually had 3 separate discovery lines going on. So one was around the software. Can we actually make it work? We do that on the firmware level. And then there was the hardware side as well. So how do we get all of these different components to communicate with each other, but actually be performant as well? So, we've got guys there, tweaking ground planes and tuning, antenna lengths and everything else, right? And so we were fortunate in that we had a quick fab facility, so we could actually, generate a board, mill it all out, and then run it through, a pick and place machine and do all of that in-house. So we could quickly make a change, run it through over a couple of days, and then test it and see how, what the outcome was. And then obviously outside of that, right, was the mechanical side. How do you make something that people are going to want to wear, and it's not, one, it needs to be able to vibrate and flash and everything else as well. So, and trying to do that all completely remote, right? So you had, as I said, 3 different teams that you weren't in physical contact with, and trying to do something that was, truly groundbreaking at the time. So it was a challenge, but we got there in the end, and the product worked. But again, with that, right, it's you tied your horse to the COVID, ban, so to speak. So to develop a product for that, vaccines came out. The world sort of awoken and came out of its slumber. And again, I've been involved with a lot of products that have been technological successes, but commercial failures. And I think that's always the other side as well, is you don't have that product management side coming in, ensuring the product is fit. But then if you don't have the commercial side as well, then saying, right, we've established a market base, we can go and sell it. There's a need here. This is what we do, right? And that's always the challenge, right? And I think that's something that I look at more and more now, is when you're developing something, it's not, is this great? Is this truly, innovative? Does people actually need it? Does it solve a problem? Is it something that people are going to actually want? Because I think that's one of the hard things, right, as an engineer, is, you pour your heart and soul and you break down barriers and then you overcome challenges. And at the end of that, you come out with a truly great product that you're really, you're proud of it, the team's proud of it, but it just doesn't get out into the hands of the people. And I think, that's ultimately what we all want, right? Is there is some of those engineers that just like to solve the problems and say, right, job done, I've solved the problem. But for me, I want to see people interact. I want to hear the stories. I want to see how that's actually changed someone's life. I guess that's what got me into this all the way back then, right? Is It's being able to make something that actually, someone uses and either gets joy out of or helps them solve a problem or even saves them from an incident or something happening in their life as well. And I think that's an important piece of that as well, is to bring the engineers along for that journey as well and involve them on that, right? And give them that feedback, not just, hey, the product worked and it didn't crash, but hey, one of the ones that came up, right, is we've got a feature in the Space Talk system, right, where we do attendance messaging. So if they're marked as absent, we send a message out to the parents to let them know, hey, such and such has been marked as absent. Please reply with a response. The parent thought this was, unusual for their child to be absent. So they actually went back home and found the child was having an asthma attack in the front yard. So if they hadn't received that message, it could have been a different result. So, knowing that, the things that we're building actually have a material effect in the world as well is I think, an important piece.
I have similar experiences, I guess, where you go in and build an amazing product and then realize, customers don't care that much about it. And it's pretty brutal. It's a pretty it's a school that has some hard lessons in it. Sometimes I think about it a bit. It's kind of like blessing and a curse. I don't know what you think about that, because you ask questions sometimes that I don't think are typically asked from a technologist. Like when you just build what you're asked to build, and it's like, yeah, cool. I'm interested in the tech, that gets me excited. I can build a cool product. I can overcome, like you were saying, some of the technical challenges. How do you navigate that? I guess, like, obviously there's been a transition where now you're kind of had some of those hard lessons. How do you navigate those types of conversations coming from a place now where you've got these learnings and you're like asking these harder questions? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, look, and I mean, I guess that's always something I'm still probably learning as well. Sometimes I am an opinionated engineer, which is a good thing and a bad thing, right? But that's one thing I'm sort of learning now, and that's one of the, I guess, one of the things I'm enjoying about my current role as well, is that I'm at that executive level. I am surrounded by people that are really talented in their fields and marketing and sales and and even in the operations side and being able to have that. I suppose it's a forum, right, where we can all sort of challenge each other a little bit as well, without stepping over into that domain of expertise. And I guess that's one thing I've sort of learned as well, is how to frame things as such, more not so much as a challenge, but more as a question, right? And that's where I think diversity, especially at this level, is really important, right? Because you can't say that you've got your eye and that you're seeing everything all at once, right? And I think just having that open collaboration, even at all levels, right? But there was just talking at the executive level at this stage, as well, as to have that that open forum for collaboration where we can all sort of cover each other's blind spots, so to speak. And as I said, I've been very fortunate in my career that I've had experiences, both from learning different of the wrong way to do things, but also as well as having that hardware experience and being in a company building hardware from the ground up, so you can sort of lean into operations a little bit and give them a bit of a hand, bit of an experience and knowledge as you bring people up through there. And then the same thing again, right? When we're discussing how we're going to bring things to market, how do we make changes? Where should our focus areas be? I think it's always good to have that, I guess, that platform for collaboration or for your voice to be heard as such. But at the end of the day, right, it's about bringing everything all up so all the options are on the table. But ultimately, right, our CEO is going to make the call on the strategic decision and what we actually execute against. But he will rely on us for our various subject matter experts, right, to execute it correctly.
What advice would you give, right, without them having to feel the pain that you've felt, right? So say you've got a founder or a CTO/founder right now pouring their heart and soul into something that they're building and they're loving the product. Like, what advice would you give them before they potentially make those mistakes that you've talked about? Is there any tactical, practical things that you would say?
Look, I think that's part of that as well, right, is knowing that full product life cycle, right? And if there's any gaps in there, right, that's where you should be focusing in on, because there should be, before you actually, And there is some of it, right, where let's just say that the goal of it being in the user's hand is over there to the east, right? It's a little bit hazy, but it's there, right? Because you know that what you're building has got product market fit. It's actually solving a problem or going to be used by someone. There's at least a marketing plan, because that's the whole thing, right? Is that if engineering is building something, marketing's not across it or aware of it or how it works. And then, commercial don't know how to sell it. Those are sort of red flags, right? That's where you start to go, okay, well, what are we actually building and why, right? There's only been, you could probably count them on your hand, right? There's only been a handful of those situations, at least in our history, right, where there's been someone who's actually made, a fortune off build it and they will come, right? Like the iPod to the iPhone, the Microsofts, the Amazons, the Googles, right? There's only a handful of those that actually happen, right? There is times where sometimes you to market in order to make it, but you can be a disruptor as well. And I think that's, sometimes being that bit of an underdog as well is almost sometimes a better position to be coming from. Yeah, look, I think from that stage, it's more around having, and it's good as well, right? Because and that's where I've done a lot of my learning, right? Is learning on, how marketing are going to market this. What's their campaigns that they're running? What's the schedules they're running? I learned a lot about that, from our current CMO as well, is that how do we target these campaigns? How do we sort of, grab someone over here and then pull them into the website and do that sort of thing as well, right? And then you're making sure that the messaging is one that grabs the user and says, right, that's actually something I want, and we're all, we're all guilty of it as well, right? You scroll through your various, social media feeds and you see something you like and you sort of click on it. And then, all of a sudden your feed's just filled with, alternatives to that product, right? And it's that sort of thing as well. That's when something's really working and it has a cohesive plan all the way through. And I'm not saying that from an engineering standpoint, we're a responsible for it, but we're a part of it as well. It's just knowing that you're just not not over here just building something, right? That's your team. Your team's doing the building. You're that interface to the rest of the company, right? And the rest of those departments and executives, right? Is all working together to release this out to the world.
Why do you think you see things from the perspective that you see things from? Whereas you may have somebody, let's say like somebody is an engineer, they're kind of coding, that's their job. They are kind of spending brain cells, if you like, looking at how do I get better at my craft? How do I, design software better, solve some of these problems better? Why do you think you looked at some of these other problems around like business and product fit and trying to understand marketing and sales and other elements of a business? Why do you think you looked at things from that perspective versus kind of sticking in the world of going deeper in tech?
I guess it just comes down to, self-reflection, right? As you sort of look through things and look back on things. For me, I'm always a problem solver. That's me. Obviously, technology is my medium that I use to help solve these problems. But that's why, I'm not one of these guys who's just going to walk past a bin fire and not stop and put it out. So I guess that's a good thing and a bad thing. For me as well, as I always sort of draw myself into where problems could be and either offer advice or to help out and lean in various areas. And that sort of, I guess is my passion, is to see a well-oiled and well-running machine, which then, as I said, again, I'm, just not going to let something, drop or fall. So I sort of get involved in that side and I learn something more of it. And as I said, back in the beginning, from doing all of that, I'm probably not the most, experienced engineer I probably could be on the tools. But I think from my experiences now, it's made me more of a, an all-rounder as such. So, knower of all, master of none sort of role, which, at the end of the day, I'm comfortable with it and accepting of it, because obviously it was my decision and the way I went about it. That's probably the difference between what you'd say, and I've seen it before, right, is that you have those traditional engineers that are just, engineering, that's it, that's what they do. You only speak to them and use tasks, and that's what you get out. And if your business is set up for that and the process is set up for that, then that's fine. And I guess that's where I sort of thrive more, is in those smaller, not so much a corporate environment, more in those smaller sort of either startups or sort of smaller businesses that just require more of an all-rounder running around as well.
I've got so many questions on this, but the one I want to ask, if you want to learn like a little about a lot, how do you have like a lens or a metric that you use to say, if I learn that, it is actually going to help? Because personal interest and just being curious can sometimes get in the way of actually using that time to do something you'd probably have got a better outcome from. How do you balance that? How do you look at that and go, is it worth my time? Is it not?
Yeah. And I guess, look, it's not perfect, right? There's sometimes I go down a rabbit hole and just end up wasting, days and nothing benefits from that, either my personal growth or the business itself. But I guess that the main thing is, right, and that's the same thing could be said about a lot of projects, right, is the intent and the outcome, right? And that's what I measure against, right, is that if I delve into this and learn this, what benefit not will I just have, but will the business or my team have from me now knowing about this? And I guess that's how I treat everything, right? Is that I won't let something go and catch on fire and burn the building down. But there are certain times where I'll just go, look, it's not my remit, it's not my wheelhouse, but me diving into that is of no benefit. That's more of a, you almost apply racy to it, right? That's more where I'll just go inform someone about it and say, hey, might want to go check on that. And that's part of that process, right? Is knowing not just your limits, but when is it, not your domain or not your time to go and step into that. And then again, it comes back to the same thing as to how I measure everything as to why I should be doing something. Is what's the intent, and then what's the outcome, and what does that actually achieve? And then to a certain degree, you've got that balance, right? Because there's always we're all guilty of it, right? We want to learn something just because it seems cool, and we want to go delve into that. But if it doesn't actually have a net benefit to either what you're doing at the moment or to the business, then it's probably something that you maybe block aside as a bit of a personal project to do on your own time later on. But that's always the challenge, right? And then it becomes, especially at our level now, right? It's not a 9-to-5 job, right? If you don't get through stuff that you need to get done, and I'm not saying that, everyone should try and complete their task list for the day each day, because, there's only 24 hours. I haven't found the 25th or 26th hour. I've tried searching, but I can't find it. You got to, you still got to get your day job done, right? Because there are, projects and people that depend on you to a certain degree. So there's only so much you can do, I guess.
How do you coach other people how do you guide other people to balance that learning as well? Especially in some of the situations you've described where your products have quite an experimental element. I'm assuming learning is a big part of what kind of makes someone effective in some of those roles, right? They need to adopt that kind of posture. How do you make sure that's an important, like a big part of their world?
Yeah, look, I guess the thing I do sort of, and when I've come into all the teams, right, I've always been open and honest about things as well. I said I'll never ask anything of anyone in my team to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. And part of that process as well, right, is you go through and you look at a unit of work or a project and what it's gonna take. And I think being able to give them that time for discovery up front, especially when you're dealing even with not just something new, and the outcomes are unknown, right? So there needs to be what you would call true experimentation, but even dealing with a legacy system or something that they're not across. And again, if it's not being documented, right, it's I almost take that approach of, it's almost like the what you call it, the clean dishwasher. If you open the door on the clean dishwasher, you're emptying it. Same thing as if you're coming across a system that's not documented and you're working on it, or guess what, you're documenting it. So I guess from there I always give them that opportunity, right, that they can do that discovery and learning. And even so, as I said, and the way that I sort of form these things as well is I actually challenge them. So I'll say to them, so as an example, right, if we're going to go and choose, a new mobile platform, right, now there's multiple, right? You've got Maui's, Compose, or even just going native now, right? So you've got all these sort of opportunities. So, you know, I actually allow them, you know, and set them aside, you know, a couple of days. And that's the other thing, right, is being very clear on the expectation, right? So saying, I'll give you guys a couple of days, go through, do some investigation, do some discovery, and then present it back to me. Like, present me with the options. Because then what I do then as well is then you can use that as, you know, a teachable moment as well and go, okay, so, you know, what's the LTS on this? What are we on the hook for developing against this or making this design decision? Because then you can always pull back to the business requirements or the actual intent of what you're doing. So an example is that obviously there was a design decision that needed to be made against the feature, and you know we come up against it all the time. All right, it's the quickest to be done, you know, it's the nicest to be done, it's a complete refactor or it's a complete rewrite, right? And so they present me the options, and I'm like, okay, well, we're midway through the sprint. We've already communicated to the rest of the business, this is the due date. This is when we're going to be delivering it. So which one of these options can be executed and delivered within that time frame? You know, and that's not always the best way to go about it, and there never is, right? It always becomes a balance, but it's always about, you know, at least being able to provide those answers up front, right? There's nothing worse than sort of getting midway through a sprint and then someone going, oh, I can't be done. You're sort of going, well, hang on, we discussed this up front, we went through it all. So, and I think part of that as well is us giving them the time to be able to do that discovery and do, you know, that look into there and say, okay, there's going to be a roadblock here or there's a brick wall here that we actually can't get around. And it goes back to that same, you know, question you first posed, Dan, is, you know, having the engineers actually involved in, you know, the scoping and the requirements and the build up of that as well, right? Because they're going to be able to tell you, hey, if they're not aware of it, we just assign them a task and go, oh, you got to go do this, and they're going to go, well, guess what? That's impossible because we don't use that. And I guess that's that whole process, right? Is allowing that time of discovery up front. It's no longer, you know, just giving them the scope and the user stories and having, you know, pure engineering go off. You know, we do need to be, you know, have a little bit of discovery and awareness so that we can factor that into, you know, the time of execution.
There would have been CEOs or similar roles asking you, Jamie, how long is this going to take? Like, we need to get this product to market in this time frame. Or even, I guess, one of the common things I think that engineering leaders find is that, say, like marketing and sales a lot of their activities are kind of planned out. So they're like, oh yes, we need to make a plan. What did you say when you have a product, say when you were building, when you're talking about antenna design, for example? Like I've got a little bit of hardware background, a small amount, enough to be dangerous. And I know RF is a very dark art and full of black magic and all sorts of fancy things. So how did you, when you don't know how many iterations it's going to take you, say, to nail, like, say, RF comms between two units or something like that, how do you communicate kind of timeframes and stuff like that to the rest of the business?
Look, I think a lot of that also comes down to, again, you know, as I said, me being, you know, a knower of a lot but master of none, is being able to get that information out, right? Becomes stakeholder management, right? Which is really what my, you know, and our roles are, right? Is knowing, talking to those guys and going, okay, you know, how much time do you really need, right? And they're going, oh, it's going to be 4 weeks, it's going to be 3 iterations, we're going to have to spend X amount of dollars, right? So you manage that up and say, right, that's that. Now, part of that as well, and I do this with all my teams as well, right, is you then hold them to that, right? So it comes into, you know, again, and, you know, sometimes people call it, you know, in a negative connotation of engineering ego, right? Because they want it to be the best. But, you know, when you actually go and talk to them, they're like, oh, no, we need more time. You know, I need it to get, you know, if we make this change, it's now going to be, you know, sub-inch accuracy. And you go, well, hang on, the requirements only needed it to be within 10 inches. So let's just cut it there. And then that's something that we can iterate on later when we've actually got cycles. Let's just, yeah, and that's where it becomes that, not just, you know, what you would call from an engineering being external, being the rest of the business, it's internal with, you know, managing your team and, you know, making sure that they're making the right decisions for the right reason, and it's for the betterment of the product. But again, it's not for perfection, because we all know anyway, as you write or develop or design something that can be absolutely perfect, but it won't be in a year's time or 6 months' time, right? There'll always be a quirk or a bug or something else outside of that. And it's more about, meeting the design brief and, meeting the intent and then delivering on that. And I guess that's the way I've always sort of run it, right? Is at least giving, the guys on the ground who are actually doing the work, the opportunity to give me a time frame, not me impose a time frame on them. And then that's when you can manage up, right? And that all just becomes that stakeholder management. Because if you're doing that the other way around, as in say a marketing date's been set, it's been set for a reason. There's some things you can't get around from, right? It's now, especially now, as I said, my role now in a publicly listed company, right, where there's been deadlines and commitments made that have been announced to the market, right? And if you do that, there's going to be, there's going to be impacts on share price and obviously, the market perception of your business not being able to deliver that product. So that's when you just sort of manage back down and expectations and go, right, okay, what do we need to shave off? What do we leave for after or post release? Those sorts of things as well. So I guess there's no perfect answer because every situation is different, right? And even in a single business, right, there's no set way that the product gets developed or even the feature as such. But I mean, I guess the main thing for me, right, is that stakeholder management, but communication early on and making sure that you've got all the information that you need up front to be able to make those decisions and be able to pull those levers on either side of that equation.
Yeah, I like to think about that as that engineers make hundreds of decisions a day, small decisions a day, and you want those decisions to go in the right direction, I guess. You're not looking for perfection, but you're probably looking for alignment, I suppose. With engineers have the same thinking track as what you're thinking about where the product's going to be going.
Yeah, exactly right, and that's where I've seen a lot of things go wrong. Right, is design decisions or there's misalignment in the business. It's not the engineer's fault as such, right? And unless there was visibility, but right, I think a lot of the times where I've seen things go wrong is that everyone runs silo, and that's never that's never going to help anyone, I think. And it's there is sort of that, and it's becoming less and less now. But back in the day, it used to be that engineering, was that dark room out in the back of the office, and it was, don't enter, right? Don't spook them, don't let natural light in there. But whereas now, it's again, it's about diversity, right? And it's covering blind spots and being able to, see things that you don't see. And that's one of the things as well, right? Is I'm always challenging myself by asking people, proposing things anyway, even if it's sort of like the draft form of an idea, right? Because then it might be a direction or an offshoot that I might not have seen. It might be an off ramp on the highway that can get us there sooner. And then if you bottle everything up and just work on it alone, without any sort of visibility or collaboration, there's missed opportunities along the way.
Cool. This has been a great chat. This has been really good. There's one thing that's unanswered, I think, for me, is like, I'm assuming, I guess, that maybe, let's say that you've got a product, you got to get to market. How long is this going to take, Jamie? And you described a process of, have things like having the engineers do the estimations, have insight into what they're doing, stack all of that together. But it sounds like there's something else going on in your brain when you're trying to make all this whole system work together. There must be an element of substantial risk, I would assume, in that things maybe are not going to plan. And you've described a little bit about, what's happening in between those two layers. Like, so at a very high level, I suppose, you've got like on the ground in a sprint where you're like, yeah, cool, let's work this out first and know what we're doing. Then we have more certainty, and then you can communicate that. That's kind of what you described, right? But what happens in between? Because when you're at the very early starting point, you're not going straight from that into a sprint, right? Or probably not.
Yeah.
So how are you transitioning from that very top level to provide answers to, say, the rest of the executive team? I'm assuming the expression of that is not at the sprint level yet, because maybe it's too early, or you've got this preparation research phase and that kind of thing. What's happening in between there?
Yeah, so I guess, obviously with that, right, you sort of bucket it in, right? You set your sort of milestones. So that becomes more, I guess, project management. So you take down, obviously, the MVP, right? That's your that's your milestone, right? Your end milestone is that MVP, right? And I guess it comes down to, some of us, it's gut, right? It's experience and knowing, okay, you're going to need a UI, you're going to need login, you're going to need this, you're going to need that, you need the interface to various things. So, what I do then is sort of, bring those down into sort of your bigger buckets, because then you can sort of put, a rough estimate, right, of a unit of work around that, right? Like it's going to take 4 weeks, to do the API layer and things like that, right? As long as you know the MVP intention, right? So if it's a simple app, sort of logging in, like as an example, our Reach app, right? So we released that out to the market late last year. So that was the intent from the business was that we had to be able to give our watch users a way to transition out into their first phone, but stay within the Space Talk ecosystem, right? So the initial thoughts on that were, okay, let's just make a watch version that just works on the phone. So you sort of know then, okay, what's our MVP is and what's our core feature sets that we need to support. So you sort of figure those out at the top level, right? And that's where you have that interaction with product and then the business as well. So it runs clear. But then once you've got that, right, that's your sort of the waterfall aspect of it, right? As you know the requirements and the scope, then you can start to build your building blocks around that, right? And you know that, okay, this, you break it down and say, right, okay, we're going to need this, we're going to need, UI, we're going to need mapping, we're going to need location. So you sort of build those all together. You sort of plan it all out, right? And I sort of, just do this, just on a, traditional pen and paper, right? And sort of just block everything out, right? So you sort of do like your high level, SAD side, solution overview. Because then from there you can sort of visualize how it all sort of hangs together, right? And then you can get into those, that's where you become, sort of like your epics and then your features. And then you get down into your user stories, where then that's when you start to involve the engineers, and things may change a bit, maybe get fuzzy on the lines of those buckets, but that's how I sort of break it all down, right? As I don't start, as I said, right down there and go, okay, to develop the authorization layer, that's going to take 2 weeks, and then this is going to take 2 weeks, that's going to take 2 weeks. So I'll put it as a bucket, because as you said, and Kris, you said it as well, right, is that you can sort of challenge your team and say, right, guys, let's all commit to this. Here are the sort of big buckets, and we're saying, right, that's going to be 4 weeks, that's going to be 2 weeks, that's going to be 8 weeks. Put this all together, and we say, right, okay, we can get something to the market within about 12 weeks, right? And we sort of set that as a bit of a fuzzy deadline. Obviously, the challenge we had as well was that obviously there was a market announcement saying that it'll be done by Q2. So therefore, our drop dead date was October. So we had to have that product released in October. So then you sort of work back from there a little bit in that scenario, right? But that's coming backwards instead of frontwards, right? Where you sort of got a deadline at the end there, and that's when you work back your concessions and say, right, okay, well, it's not going to be able to do this up on release. Getting those sort of buckets and knowing how everything all sort of hangs together as well. And I think that's an important thing to look at it, right, is being able to look at it from that 10,000 foot view, and be able to get down into the weeds later on, right? And I guess that's probably one of the other things as well, right, which is always sort of a theme coming through, right, is do engineers need to graduate or evolve up into that managerial role, or there is ways that you can be off the tools, so to speak, but be at that that solution architecture side. And I think that's an important role as well, because obviously from there, right, there's that oversight and visibility of the entire system. And that's that's not necessarily the managerial role, but it's a way in which you're not always on the the daily grind and keeping up with the frameworks and languages as such.
You can take this in any direction you want, right? But if you're if there's a senior engineer listening and they're really strong technically, but they do have that inclination to step out of it or understand the bigger picture, and maybe they don't have that opportunity Because it sounds like you create a very clear opportunity for them to do that, and almost like a yardstick to say, oh, they're interested in it, they get more involved. What advice would you give to someone like that? Like, what skills or areas should they be developing? How would they go about doing that?
Yeah. So I guess look, the thing is putting your hand up, right? As well. Like we got our eyes on many things at our layer as well, and sometimes we do miss them, right? And I think that's something to bring up. Like if you do have like a manager who's got who's doing a PDP with you, and you are starting to put that up, like be upfront and honest, right? Like I mean, I'm probably the worst at it as well, and I should be doing a better job of that as well, as asking my guys like a 4 to 5 year plan. And they're saying, well, you never have it, right? But say if you have that one guy who says, I want to be in your role, which is fine, right? Because then you start to know those guys who want to try and come up those ranks, right? Because at the end of the day, right, it's not finite, right? Like it's going to evolve out. So I do want to try and bring people up through the ranks, and I will, put time and effort into those people and sort of mentor them along. But the other side of things as well is I think there's a lot to be said for project management and that side as well, and especially if you want to get up more into that sort of management side and running a team and that sort of thing. I'm not saying you have to go off and get certified, and product management and do that side of things, but I think that's probably one of my core sort of attributes that I use on a day-to-day basis, right? Is more of that project management, stakeholder management, and prioritization on when things should be done when. And that's it. And you're going to see that with the guys as well, right? And there's people out there who are, it's just, there's some things that just can't be taught. And that's one of those things. And being able to realize that early on, right? Like I know my limitations now, and I know when I should rely on someone who's better to go and do that job or do that task. And I guess that's one of the key things as well, right? As I just said before, right? There is a way to be, move up, but not actually be in that managerial side, because as I said, it's not, a little bit of management and a lot of engineering. It's actually the other way around, right? You are not engineering as much as you would like to. You do lose that part of your job. So if you're a passionate engineer, I'd actually probably, and you're a very talented engineer, I would probably challenge them and say, well, is that something that you really want to do? As I said, there's other aspects, as I said, like solution architecture is a very important piece of the role as well. And you can do that and sort of not be on the tools as such, but still be close to the technical aspects of engineering. Without being involved in say the stakeholder management, HR, reporting, and spreadsheets and PowerPoints.
And last question from me. Obviously, you might not be able to share much being listed, but what's going on at Space Talk? Anything exciting happening at the moment?
Yeah, look, we've just obviously announced now that so we've had a couple of products that have sort of been bouncing around in the market. So one of them is our seniors watch. So what we've been doing now is actually, it's sort of sold traditionally, alongside our kids watches and JB Hi-Fi. So, this is a device that's, obviously got, it's a 4G capable device. So there's a phone on your wrist, but it's got accelerometers and sensors, so it can detect falls and do SOS as well. So, for a lot of us now with our parents who are aging in place, it is a nice piece of technology to give to them, so that we can, be, at least aware that they're safe, and if anything does happen, we can contact them and they can contact us. What we're starting to do now is actually integrate that now with 24/7 service providers. So we've just done one with Safety Link, which is part of Gambion's Health in Victoria. So what that allows it to do now is it actually acts as an MPERS device, which is a mobile personal emergency response device. So what happens is, instead of it, say, calling me, so say if my mum had it on and she had a fall, it would then call me. Then if I didn't answer, it would then call the next emergency contact and roll through that, and then finally call emergency services at the end. Obviously, voicemail has a big part to play in that as well. So if it goes to voicemail, the watch thinks that that's a call answered. So what we actually do is we flip that around. So what will happen is we'll integrate in with the 24/7 monitoring system and send them an alarm. So then they will actually call the watch, and then the watch will only receive a call from that caller ID. So then that allows basically an open communication line, so they can check, make sure they're okay. Then if they need to call in, medical services, an ambulance, they can do so then as well, and then inform, the myself afterwards of the event. So starting to look and look at the shape of what that looks like overall, right? Because I think we can all acknowledge now that, especially that place there and being safe and offering that safety and awareness for that market is the need that needs to be done. And there's a lot of product in the market at the moment that's maybe not suitable or not fit for purpose. And so that's the one thing that obviously Space Talk does, is that we develop and build and deploy our devices all locally as well. So it's our ecosystem, all of our data centers and code bases all developed here and hosted here as well. So we've got all of those opportunities and stability in the platform for those systems. But yeah, look, it's developing that, but also as well as staying ahead, right? Once you're in this sort of market as well with hardware and 4G or telecommunication connected devices, right? It's about what's next and what's the next sort of feature sets, and working with our customers in our market and trying to get an understanding on what it is that they want, and being able to build that platform that's agile enough to be able to pivot when need be to provide those services should it come up.
Absolutely fascinating. Sounds like there's a lot going on. But thank you, Jamie, for taking the time to have a conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks.
No, thank you. It's been great.